All right, everybody, welcome back. You ever get that feeling?
The feeling?
Yeah, there's just not enough time in the day anymore.
Oh,
Like the
yeah.
hours, they're shrinking or something.
Absolutely. Always racing the clock.
Well, get this. For this deep dive, we went down a rabbit hole, one of the deepest yet.
Oh, tell me about it. This stuff was dense.
Seriously, some crazy physics and philosophy stuff. And you know what? It turns out there's this concept, temporal infraction, that suggests, well, maybe this isn't just a feeling. Maybe the way we experience time is actually changing.
It's wild, right? We're talking about the possibility that time, as we perceive it, is actually different than what our clocks are telling us.
Totally. And what's really cool is that the source we looked at, they actually have this mathematical model to explain it.
A mathematical model.
Yeah, it's got this thing called temporal infraction factor. Right. They call it IT for short.
Right.
And basically it's like, imagine a lens that's distorting how we see time, and as time goes on, that lens gets thicker and thicker. So those hours, they start feeling shorter and shorter.
So it's not that time itself is speeding up, but our perception of it is changing.
Exactly. It's like if time's a river,
Yeah.
this IT factor is like a dam that's slowly being built up, right? So even though the same amount of water's flowing through it, it feels like the river's slowing down.
That's a great analogy. But the big question is, what's causing this temporal infraction in the first place?
Right. Well, the source gives us a couple of possibilities. They call them external and internal causes.
Okay, let's start with the external ones. What are we talking about here?
So these are like cosmic level events. We're talking changes in the universe's expansion rate, stuff like that. And somehow that's messing with how our brains interact with time.
Whoa, that's heavy.
Yeah.
So something happening billions of light years away could be impacting how we experience time here on Earth.
Yeah, it's kind of hard to wrap your head around, right? It's like, how could a solar flare on a distant star make my morning commute feel even shorter?
It is pretty mind-boggling. But then there are the internal causes too, right? Things happening within us.
Yeah, these are more about the changes our brains and bodies go through as we age.
So the source suggests that as we get older, our brains might speed up how we process time.
Exactly. And that's why time seems to fly by faster when we're older.
Yeah.
Our brains are just processing everything quicker, so it feels like less time is passing.
And they call this subjective compression, right? Like our subjective experience of time is getting compressed as we age.
Right, subjective compression, like our internal clock is speeding up. It's a bit unsettling to think our own brains could be playing tricks on us like that. But, okay, let's say this whole temporal infraction thing is real. How do we even test it? It's not like we could just, measure time with a ruler.
You're right. It's a tricky concept to measure. But the source does suggest a few interesting experiments we could try. Well, we could study people's perception of time across different age groups, like compare how teenagers experience time compared to, say, people in their 50s.
Oh, interesting. So maybe teenagers, with their brains still developing, might perceive time as moving slower compared to adults who have more set neural pathways.
Exactly. We could also look at how time perception changes across different seasons. Like maybe people feel like time drags on in the winter when it's cold and dark, but it flies by in the summer when there's more daylight and activity.
Oh, yeah, I can definitely see that. Maybe a bunch of teenagers at the beach in the summer, they feel like time's standing still. But their parents, back home shoveling snow, they're feeling every second tick by.
That's the idea. And get this, we could also investigate if there's any correlation between major cosmic or geophysical events and shifts in time perception.
So if there's a huge solar flare or a massive earthquake, maybe that somehow impact how we perceive time.
Exactly. I mean, think about it. These events release massive amounts of energy, and we know that energy and time are interconnected. So it's not totally crazy to think there might be some subtle impact on our experience of time.
Wow, that would be pretty wild. Imagine, news reports saying, solar flare expected to cause widespread feelings of time speeding up. Stock up on coffee and buckle up.
That's a great headline. But in all seriousness, while it's fascinating to speculate, it would be really difficult to prove a direct link between these events and our perception of time.
I guess so. The variables are just too vast, right?
Right. But there's another approach. We could actually develop computer models to simulate how both psychological and physical factors could be tweaking this IT factor.
It's a simulation of time.
Essentially, we could use these models to predict different temporal infraction scenarios and see how they play out over time.
That's pretty cool. It's like having a time machine in a computer. We could fast forward and see how different factors might influence our perception of time in the future.
It's a fascinating area of research, that's for sure. And it really makes you think about the nature of time itself.
It does. It makes you realize that time isn't just this rigid, unchanging thing. It's much more fluid and subjective than we might think.
Absolutely. And maybe, just maybe, understanding how our perception of time works could give us more control over it.
So maybe next time I'm feeling stressed because the week's flying by, I shouldn't blame my to-do list. Maybe it's this temporal infraction thing messing with me.
It's definitely worth considering. But here's a final thought. The source focuses a lot on the negative aspects of temporal infraction, this feeling of time shrinking and slipping away.
Right, like we're all victims of a cosmic clock conspiracy.
Exactly. But what if this shifting perception of time isn't necessarily a bad thing? What if there are hidden opportunities in it?
Okay, I like where you're going with this. What kind of opportunities are we talking about?
Well, what if we could learn to hack this phenomenon to our advantage? What if we could figure out ways to stretch out those hours to make time feel more expansive, even if the clock is still ticking at the same rate?
So instead of being afraid of time slipping away, we learn to, bend time to our will.
Exactly. What if there are techniques or practices or maybe even technologies that could help us manipulate our perception of time? Not to speed it up, but to slow it down, to savor it more. Maybe there are ways to make those 24 hours feel more like 36 or even 48.
Now that's a thought worth exploring. Instead of fearing a shrinking day, maybe we can find ways to expand the time we have. Maybe we can learn to live more fully in each moment, regardless of how fast or slow it feels. Definitely something to ponder, folks. And for our listeners, make sure to check out the show notes for more information on temporal infraction and links to the source material. Until next time, thanks for joining us on this deep dive.
See you next time.